and then you got a whole group of people that are just crawling on the ground, and they're all looking at each other, hand signals, and these animals are just, I'm over here eating grass, and they're all crawling through, and they get really close, and then the one guy either blows like a little whistle or yells something, and then everybody stands up and goes, ah, and they start running and spearing a whole bunch of stuff, and it's like, that is absolutely ridiculous. It just doesn't work like that. Hey folks, Ryan Gill here with Hunt Primitive, where we entertain, educate, and inspire to help others accomplish their own primitive building and hunting goals. Thanks for joining us today on an episode of Secrets and Science Chapters, where we go through and break down individual chapters from the Secrets and Science collection of books. Alright, the chapter we're going to talk about today is actually several chapters, and I'm not going to specifically read any, but I'm going to at least list here some of the chapters in the table of contents, because we're talking about different methods of hunting, of primitive hunting, in ancient times and also today. So many different chapters in both the Secrets and Science of Primitive Archery and the Secrets and Science of the Atlatl. We talk about different hunting techniques, obviously one geared more towards the bow and arrow, the other geared towards the atlatl, but there are quite a bit of crossover correlations. But in Secret Science of Primitive Archery, we specifically talk about all different types of hunting, including poison arrows, pursuit hunting. Don't talk about horseback in here, but we will a little bit today. Hunting with dogs, also just stalking and walking or disguised stalking. Ambushing animals, basically just waiting for them to come by, and then even a little bit more than discussion in here about driving animals off cliffs and through water and that kind of stuff. So again, a lot more information in the books where you can actually dive quite a bit deeper. So if you want to get those, you should know where to get them, huntprimitive.com. But there was a thing that, a comment that came through on one of my videos that I put out a couple weeks ago, and it was, I had mentioned in my primitive hunting and experimental archaeology video that sometimes people are under the impression that the primitive gear doesn't work really well, and so the only way to actually kill stuff is to just shoot it multiple times. And of course, the way that I talk and I work through things, I don't necessarily break down every single thing that I'm talking about, especially because there's so much information in the books, where the books are extremely thorough. I just basically come up with anything that I could possibly, any questions that somebody would ask, and then I write something about that. But that's why the books are so much more thorough than a talk. And so because of that, I wanted to also remind you that there are things that are probably going to get left out that are important that I'm talking about in these videos, or things that may be true in one circumstance but not necessarily in another. And so just kind of keep aware of that. Overall, the information in the book is going to be exceptionally thorough, but to retouch on that, having to run animals down and pincushion them, I was able to, in the comments later, then go back and explain that yes, that does happen. There are examples that there's videos to be seen, there's cave paintings to be seen of animals being pincushioned, and honestly, we've done it as well. We've done some different studies and tests and methods of hunting where we specifically go just gang hunt something and just basically shoot it or spear it until it's dead.
Get around him!
And there's some ways that that's efficient and some ways that there's not. And we're going to discuss some of those in this video. But that specific talk wasn't saying that people never did that, because they certainly did. It was just that they didn't necessarily have to. That sort of scenario usually comes from not making a good shot. So you're taking much further shots sometimes in, primitive hunting context, or shots on animals that are running by, or drive hunting, and you're getting an arrow in something where if you have the opportunity to put one like right through the lungs, it's just going to run over and die. So there's not really going to be any chase to it. By the time you've caught up to it, it's already pretty much going down and it's dead. So those are the ideal situations that you're shooting for. But what I was trying to convey in that video was that primitive hunting implements are not so crude that you have to just, it doesn't matter how many times you hit them in the lungs, you got to just keep sticking them. That's the only way you're going to kill them. And that's what sometimes Hollywood or dramatizations will lead you to believe, that these aren't efficient enough to be one shot, one kill weapons, where in reality most of the time they are. And so that's really the message that I was trying to convey, that yes, these are built to where they can be extremely efficient with one single shot. And that's typically what we strive for. But again, yes, running stuff down and pin cushioning it is a reality on some occasion. Alright, so we'll talk about stalking, either spot and stalk or walking and stalking is a lot of times what we do here. And spot and stalk, simple as you're getting up on a higher point, you're looking down, this is more open country, you're looking down or you're looking across a larger expanse, you're seeing an animal, and now you're putting together a plan to work your way through some cover, down a stream bed or around some trees or whatever, but you're trying to get in closer to it, and then you're trying to work in close enough to get a shot. So obviously that's probably one of the oldest ways of hunting, if I had to take a guess, and still very efficient, but it takes a certain terrain to do that, or a certain skill set of the hunter, where some people are really cut out for that type of hunt and then other people aren't. And I guess we should probably also say all the lists of things that we're going to go through today, clearly one is not significantly better than the rest, because then that's the only one that would have ever been used. So people would have specifically been hunting with the most efficient method for their area and the animals they were hunting. Because remember, hunting isn't just, it's not the same exact thing everywhere you go and with every animal. Every animal is going to be a little bit different. Every different species of animal, per se, is going to be a bit different in how they react. Hunting bison with an atlatl is totally different than hunting deer with a bow and arrow. But some people think, well, the methods should be exactly the same, and they're not. They're not, really not even close. So just keep that in mind, that different regions, different animals, different weapons require so many different types of hunting. And that's, I know people love to sit and talk about, well, this is the way that this was hunted, this was the way that this was probably done, and I read this in a book, and I watched this in a movie, and I did this, and whatever. It's like, I think you have to look at the grander scheme of things and accept that everything has been thought of. You're talking thousands of years. Everything has been thought of and everything has been tried. I don't think that there is anything new in the world of hunting as far as tactics that we can come up with today. Anything that's viable now was viable then, and it was at least implemented and tried. So keep that in mind, that like, well, you forgot about this, and there's an example here of this. Got it. It's all been done. I'm just trying to give you a rundown on it. So next would be stuff like disguise stalking, which I don't have a ton of experience with. We've tried some of that kind of stuff where example would be you take like one of those strutting turkey decoys. I took a turkey skin one time and I mounted it on a river cane frame and basically made a turkey decoy that I could walk behind. And it's funny, every time I did that, turkeys would run away. It was the craziest thing. I have no idea, because it really looked, it was a turkey, and they would still run away from it. I've also seen people use those, what they call Montana decoys, that they hold up in front of them. They've used those big cows and they can walk in on some stuff. Use that to bring animals closer. I think there was might have been in the Lewis and Clark story. I can't remember exactly, but there was a native guy that was dressed up as a pronghorn antelope, and I think that they came close to shooting him because his disguise was so good. Because pronghorn's one of those things where you can decoy those in, especially when they're running. The bucks will come in, they'll be very curious, and you can get shots in that way. I've done some work with that, not dressing up like an antelope, but making like a cutout decoy essentially, and carrying that and getting within shooting range. Very difficult to do, holding a decoy and shooting sticks and rocks. I think that guy's method of dressing like one, building an elaborate costume out of pronghorn antelope skin and head and all that stuff, that's probably the best way to go. But you got to be really dedicated and wanting to live out there, and that's how you do it. Again, it's just something very specialized that somebody lives out on the plains, and if there's no bison around at the time, but there's pronghorn, then that would be a viable option to say, well, we're going to hunt something, so we've got nothing but time. We might as well build this, these outfits and go try to get them to come to us. Cut the distance down a little bit. So, again, fairly viable. I don't really have much experience with that one, but just stalking and walking in general seems to be some of the most productive for us. And the reasons for that is that you can be opportunistic on a lot of different things. So when we're hunting down here in Florida, me and Vastin are hunting, and we can cover 5 to 7 miles oftentimes in the morning is what we'll walk. We'll walk 5 to 7 miles in the morning, and then usually I would say 3 to 5 miles in the evening. And then sometimes we do a mile or two walk through in a thick hammock in the middle of the day. Sometimes it just kind of depends on weather and time of year and all of that kind of stuff. But we usually cover a lot of ground. And the morning hunts, especially because the animals seem to be moving for longer periods of time, we'll stay out and we hunt for longer periods of time. But we can be walking along and see out in the distance, okay, there's hogs out there. And so then we start moving in, putting a play together to go hunt these hogs. Well, likewise, we could be walking along and say, well, there's a deer, so let's go try to shoot a deer. And then you could also be walking along and all of a sudden jump a rabbit, and a rabbit bounces off, and you can see it goes on the other side of this bush, and we sneak around, and all of a sudden you can see it, now you're shooting at rabbits. Many times we've been walked right up and grabbed a hold of armadillos. That's kind of the fun. You're walking along, there's an armadillo there, and you sneak up and try to grab it by its tail. Sort of a deal. You don't even have to shoot an arrow at it, but that obviously gives you the chance to kind of do your stalk and your hunt and have fun, grab one, and then, okay, well, I don't really want to eat it, so I'll put it down and let it run off. Then shoot squirrels. Basically anything that you run across, there's an opportunity. And so it is very opportunistic hunting. And we typically see a lot of animals, even going out on public land and walking vast distances, typically turns up seeing some sort of animals one way or another. Even in areas that are extremely overhunted, you can still put on a lot of miles, and if you're willing to put on the miles and actually move fast, you can typically see stuff. Now, are you going to spook stuff and run it off? Sure, that happens too. If you're, we don't walk real slow and creep along, and we're not covering. For a long time I had talked about that this is when I was much younger and significantly more inexperienced. And yes, you'll see deer, but I would say, well, we're going to get in the woods, and then when I'm going to walk in, maybe 50 yards or so, and then I'm going to start going real slow, and I'm going to take a slow step, and I'm going to stop, and I'm going to scan, and then I'm going to take another slow step, and it's going to take me an hour just to go this next 50 yards, and then another hour, and it's like, really, you're not sneaking up on anything. Animals are just coming to you, and really you find yourself in precarious situations because you're not in proper cover. Usually when you see something, you're not in the best position, so now you're trying to get in the best position anyway. And it does work. I've done stuff like that and had animals come in and shoot it, or could have shot if it was an illegal situation. But typically that's no different than ambush hunting. So ambush hunting is just getting in and, either making a ground blind. I don't usually like to make them per se. I like to get into a thick bush that's already nice cover, that's naturally growing, it's going to stay green, and then I go break or clip out an area that I can hunt in. So I've got several videos of doing that, especially in the palmettos down here. I like to get in there and cut out an area that I can maybe see down this way, so I can see them coming, but then I've got one little shooting lane.
Boy, I got that one. Holy smokes, I got that one.
And I can always take some of my clippings and dress up an area if I need to, but that's ambush hunting. You're waiting for something to come by, but you're building something to sit in so you've got proper cover. And that's an efficient method, but it's just a waiting game, and the animal really has to just come right down your one shooting lane. Maybe you've got two shooting lanes per se, but for the most part you're hunting a single trail, and that's efficient in the sense that when they come down, as long as they don't wind you, you're pretty well going to get them. But you might spend a lot of time sitting there, and you're also missing out on that opportunity to be opportunistic on other things, because it's pretty rare that you're sitting there, and a rabbit comes by. Sometimes you might be sitting there and like a raccoon comes by, or maybe anything can, but generally speaking, you're not just getting this parade of animals that's coming by all the time. You could sit an entire evening and just not have anything come by, maybe a squirrel run by overhead or something, but there's many times. So it's not super productive, it's just easier to get a shot. But then back that up again, because we already moved on to the ambush, but it segued really well because of the discussion of walking really slow. You're basically just ambush hunting. You're waiting for the animals to come to you. You're just slowly walking, and you're not even hunting a specific trail. So what I found is it's just not as productive. Can you kill animals doing that? It's like, well, sure, but what we found to be the most productive in this type of walking and stalking is to cover ground, move. And people are like, well, if you move too fast, the animals are going to see you. And it's like, there's a pace in which you can walk, but be aware. And if you're using all of your senses, your ears, your eyes, and your nose, love to smell animals all the time. Deer less so, but I have smelled deer and said, oh shoot, I can definitely smell a deer, especially running buck. Elk are actually pretty easy to smell, and hogs are very easy to smell if you get the wind in your favor. But basically, I would be walking great distances, several miles, and I'm looking for stuff out in the distance. Well shoot, I even do this sometimes in the tighter woods. You just try to walk quietly and maybe not super fast, but you're moving along at a pretty good pace, and then all of a sudden you'll hear something, you'll see something move, and it's like you just know to freeze right away, and then all of a sudden you get on. A lot of times you see them before they see you. Now if you're making a ton of noise, then it's going to give you away. Like if it's just all dry leaf litter, then that's pretty hard to walk through. But we've also walked through some pretty noisy stuff, because animals are noisy too. They don't specifically know what you are. They might just think you're another deer or hog or whatever walking through the woods. We've done that to where there's literally hogs in palmettos and they're all rooting around. Well, they're making a bunch of noise and people are like, I can't go in there, they'll hear me. And I'm like, they don't know that you're not another hog. I was like, sometimes you'll walk in and it'll go, "Arr!" and then they stop a second, and if you keep moving, that's the sound that they make. They're all like, "Arr!" and then everybody freezes, and then if they continue to hear something walking, they're going to run off, because they already know as soon as they make that grunt, everybody freeze and listen. So the best thing to do if one grunts, you just stop moving. And if the wind's in your favor, they'll probably just go right back to feeding. And then as soon as you do that, you keep walking in. But they're noisy too. I've had deer to where they're noisy walking and feeding, and you can kind of walk right in along with them. As long as they can't specifically see you, they'll ignore the noise that you're making. So you don't have to be perfectly quiet. I mean, do you bust a lot of animals doing this? Sure, it happens all the time. But you're also, okay, this hunt's over, I'm going to go find another one. It's like sometimes the hunt's over before it ever started, right? You're walking along and all of a sudden, man, there was a deer standing right there and I just didn't even notice it. Like, man, that stinks. So you just let it go and you keep going. And then next thing you know, you do see one, you catch a glimpse of something, you freeze. Okay, now we're on to the hunt. And now you're slipping along a little bit easier. To me, that's one of the most productive ways, but really the most fun ways to hunt. And I do say productive because a lot of people say, man, I've been hunting like that for years and I've never been able to kill anything. It's like you just got to keep after it, and the more you do it, the better you'll actually get. But it's not specifically saying, well, I'm going to go do this for deer and I'm only hunting deer. Remember, this is opportunistic hunting. So if you're hunting in that manner, you're really looking for food kills. If you're looking for like a trophy buck and you're hunting like that, it's not going to be the most efficient method of hunting. You know, something like trophy buck is going to be a lot smarter than most other animals. So that's one of the reasons you don't see me shoot a lot of big trophy bucks. I've killed some nice ones, but at the same time, that's not really what I'm after. I'm doing more food recreation type hunts. Like we're out here hunting for food, so we shoot rabbits. You know, we'll stop by the stream or the creek and shoot some fish in the afternoon. We'll whatever kind of runs out that I'm like, I'm interested in eating that, then we go pursue and kill that. And it doesn't matter. I shoot wee little hogs. I'll shoot yearling deer. I'll shoot adult hogs, adult deer. This is opportunistic hunting for food. So you got to keep that in mind. So if you are doing this type of hunt, expect that when we come across something like, okay, well, here's a squirrel that's giving me a really, really good shot, we're going to take this opportunity and we're going to make that shot. And you're not giving up, you're not passing opportunities, because that's specifically what you're here and hunting for. Alright, so then we did cover the ambush hunting per se, so I don't think we necessarily need to touch on that, but less opportunistic in general. Still being opportunistic with it, but that's just the long-term waiting game. And like I said, I think it's actually less productive if you take early people and just saying, okay, we're going to go sit in blinds. If you know how it is, you get a whole bunch of hunting buddies. Now let's just not assume that we're not hunting with rifles and compound bows and stuff like this. You're talking hunting sticks and rocks, shots probably, let's just say 20 yards and in, but maybe not. Obviously they could shoot further, they weren't so much worried about wounding stuff. But if you have a whole bunch of guys and you all go sit in your different spots, there's a very good chance you're not killing anything. So that's why I think with primitive hunting, specifically for food, the walking and stalking has been more productive for me as opposed to ambush hunting. But, different cases, different areas, we already discussed all that. Now, next on that would be stuff like drive hunts, which we've done quite a bit of this stuff, especially when my dad was alive and we would go hunt with my family, either in Pennsylvania or in Montana. We would do a lot of drive hunting. And that was a lot of fun and also very productive. And so mostly deer hunting, and how that was typically working was we would either use some sort of geographical thing to like a stream or a steep rock face. If we had an opportunity, sometimes we could do that, where that's already a barrier, but we're gonna push one area. Let's just do this. One area in particular, like in Pennsylvania, I ended up killing 3 deer in the same exact spot in different years, because there were trails that were running parallel to a creek. They could cross the creek, but it's also wintertime, and I don't think that bothers them so much. But specifically, and you would hear deer bust across the creek once in a while, but they weren't driving through banging brush and yelling and scaring stuff and getting it to run. They were, every time that we did this, it was slow hunting, to where somebody was just walking through, kind of just walking and stalking kind of a deal, like we just talked about. And you'd switch back and forth and say, well, a couple people, sometimes it was just 2 of us, many times just 2, one working through and one watching. And then other times we might have a whole group of people, but you have a couple guys that are posted up and they're watching trails, and then another 1 or 2 guys that are going to work through the thicket. So they're going kind of through some of this bedding area the best they can, and they're not trying to scare stuff. They're trying to sneak up and shoot stuff too, but more times than not, you kind of get busted, especially in that really thick stuff. But the deer sometimes, and I would say almost more often, don't come blowing out, especially younger deer. Sometimes you get that really old deer or an old buck, he's going to blow out and he'll just be gone, or he'll sneak out kind of the back door. But sometimes that's how you kind of catch them. A lot of times the younger deer or whatever, they'll push a little bit. Sometimes they even try to circle back. But anyway, if you find yourself really set up and hiding in an ambush position, now animals are getting driven past you. And so that's worked really well. Like I said, I ended up killing 3 deer, all at under 15 yards. I think they pretty much all came down the same exact place, and that was over 2 different years that we hunted in there. And so that situation worked really well. Then in Montana we used to hunt these big coulees sometimes, which is just like a ravine or a draw, I suppose, as you would call it here in the East. And we would kind of do the same thing, where they're going to want to stay in the brush. There's pretty much always a creek that runs down through the center, although it's a little one. It's not stopping them from going anywhere. But usually up the sides of the coulee, there's some areas that are brushy, and some of them have little coulees that come off of those, or all these drainages. And so there would be times where we would say, okay, well, you're going to head down over here onto this side of the coulee where the wind is correct. So the wind's going to be in your favor. Animals moving to you aren't going to smell you. Their wind is coming to you. And then other people are going to come around, and we're going to just work this coulee out. And a lot of times, especially if it's big, it's better to have more than one person, because you might be walking along, and even if you bump a deer, it may not go straight and stop. It may not go straight and then continue. What it may do is actually go to circle back, because it wants to be where it wants to be. And sometimes that deer that you bumped will run up a little ways and stop, but then it'll circle to try to get back around you, because it doesn't specifically know that you're hunting it. It just doesn't want to be around you. You know, they're scared of everything. So it might just be trying to go right back to where it was hanging out and bedding, but it's going to go behind you. But you got another guy that's over here. It doesn't even know it, and all of a sudden it comes running and runs right in front of them. So that's happened to us multiple times, where you're just, again, even bumping it to another pusher. And then, of course, when you start getting down to the end of this, you've kind of stacked deer up that don't really want to push out into open prairie or have to bust over the next hill. And, you know, depends on how bad you kind of push them, how aggressively you're stalking. But you'll kind of push them into the last big brush patch. And so now you've herded all these deer up. There might be, there was times there was probably 20 deer in there. And we would surround it. And, of course, they would start busting out in different ways. Somebody would get a shot at one, and then all of a sudden it would spook other ones, and those ones would bounce out somewhere, and somebody would get a shot in that. And we used to do that fairly often, and there was many times, this is back when you used to get a lot of doe tags. You could get something like 6 mule deer doe tags sometimes in a year. And it was not uncommon for us at that time to go out and kill 3 on one drive with bows and arrows. Now, I was the only one that was hunting with primitive stuff. The other guys were shooting either, my dad shot a recurve, which, I mean, that's comparable, and then my cousins shot compound bows. But it was not uncommon for us to kill, 2, 3, 4 deer per time that we went out. So it's a very effective method if you have the location, the group of people, and the animal populations to do that. But even when it was just 2 of us, we would pick smaller drainages, and we would just pick an opposite side, and we don't specifically know, like we would be able to see, okay, we know there's a deer bedded in here, at least one, and then one of us would walk all the way around. Me and my cousin Dave used to do this all the time. That one of us would walk around and come up through the bottom, and then one would come through the top, and we would just kind of work our way in closer and closer, and eventually someone's either going to shoot it, which happened. Sometimes one person would shoot one, and it would scare more up, and they would come out, and the other person would shoot one. That happened one time that he shot one, and we only thought there was 1 deer in there. It turned out there was, I don't know, 5 or 6, and these were mule deer. He shot one, it ran up on the hill and died, and more got up and ran right up through the hawthorns right to me. One literally was running right to me, and I leaned up to shoot, and it turned, and it was from shoot almost from here to the camera, and it was running by, and I shot it, and it ran up the hill about 70 yards and died. So it's just very, very effective methods. Now, some of these did turn out to be really good one-shot, one-kill hunts, and then other times it did turn into, okay, this deer's running by, and there's a tremendous amount of space here, and you'd hit one too far back, or you would make somewhat of a crippling shot. There was a time that I shot a mule deer, and I hit it just below the heart, so it missed the chest cavity, but it went through both front legs really high, but was bleeding like crazy, but also really had a hard time running because it went through both front legs, so it was cutting muscle and tendon in there, and it was hobbled up, and basically had to, like, it still was pretty strong. You couldn't just chase it down, but as it got weaker, then it was like we'd be able to catch up to it. And, I'd sling an arrow, and then I hit it again somewhere, hit it in the hind quarter. Now it's just a recovery a recovery situation. So you're just trying to get arrows in this thing to slow it down, to recover it. And then eventually you catch up to it, and I don't know, I had 3 or 4 arrows in it, and that's just the nature of hunting and primitive hunting. So when you see some of those pictures, cave paintings like Lascaux caves or whatever, that they've got deer that are running out to them and they're all filled with arrows. Well, we've specifically reenacted those hunts. That's how some of these go. And that also happens when Vasson and I are hunting hogs, that we, a lot of times when you're hunting with buddies, you shoot something, you're like, well, it's mine, I shot it, and it's like, it's very individual, where you're like, well, nobody else shoot it, it's just mine, and when Vasson and I hunted, or when my cousin and I hunted, it didn't matter so much who shot it. We were just out there to get the animal. So we really were team hunting. It was, if I shoot one and wound it, there's some people that are like, don't shoot it, it's mine. I don't want anybody else to shoot it. And I don't know. And I remember even being younger and thinking that same thing. Like, oh, maybe it doesn't count, or it's not my kill if somebody else shoots it. Now we're just like, hey, we shot one. Keep shooting it. Even if you think that shot was great. If you get another shot on it, shoot it. Because you can lose animals and think, I hit it really well, but you actually didn't. So there's been times that Vasson and I, many times, that we've been hunting, one of us shoots a hog, the other one gets another shot at it as it's running away, and we're continuing to shoot. And next thing you know, we got 2, 3, 4 arrows in a hog. And, you end up, even if the first shot was good and it was running by, we're shooting at it again. And it's like, you just keep shooting in that scenario if you have a shot. Now, if you know it's down and it's dead, you're not going to sit and keep shooting it. At that point, you just let it expire or run up and stick it with a knife. But there are situations in which, when you're team hunting, the goal is to get the animal. It's not to get the trophy or the credit for the kill. Obviously, it feels good to be like, well, I'm the guy that killed this or whatever. But team hunting is all about cooperation. You're after food. You're not after that individual experience. So those are going to be your main methods right there of hunting. And then let's talk too about driving, where to push an animal into something, like running it through water or running bison off cliffs and that kind of stuff. I know there's been many times where I'll do a video on, like hunting bison or whatever, that we're just, at Lattle hunting them. And people will say, this isn't how it was done, they ran them off cliffs. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's not the only way. And I think people do get really caught up in that, well, this is, because I saw it was done this one way once, this is the way that everybody did it. And it's like, well, there's not cliffs everywhere. And that there's only so many times that works before at least the ones you're specifically hunting are wise to that game. Now, obviously, if you've got migrating herds coming through, you've got specific areas that it's worked well for you. And what's funny, too, is I don't believe bison don't specifically they'll just run and be like, oh, here's a cliff, and then just jump off it. Typically, you're talking about big herds. You're pushing, and the first ones are like, oh, there's a cliff, and they're stopping. They got the brakes put on. But all the ones in the back, they don't realize that the brakes are on, and they're shoving the ones off the cliff. And that's typically how that's working. Also, it works that way if you watch these big herds of elk, and they come across the barbed wire fence. The first few, they'll jump it. What'll happen is they start jumping, and there gets to be so many. All it takes is one to hesitate. You ever watch a herd of elk do this? They'll run up to it, and they're jumping it. One will hesitate or trip or something, and the rest don't even know that there's a fence there yet. And now all of a sudden they've just pushed all the rest through it. So the one that hesitated or stopped, now the fence is down, and that's why ranchers will go out and be like, elk are really, really hard on fences. In fact, the last time that I was in Montana hunting, my friend out there was out fixing fence because a whole herd of elk just tore it down just in the same way. But so that same idea of, well, that's how that elk tearing down fence, that's the same thing that happens with bison, that they're running off to go to a cliff or maybe to a deep hole in a river, something like that. And if you can get some to push the other ones off, then either they're going to hit the bottom of the cliff or they're going to end up in the deep hole that's in the river and swimming or whatever, and then people can be slinging arrows at them and stuff like that. So remember, anything that can be done will have been done at some point, but there's not an end-all be-all just going, well, the only way that they hunted bison was to push them off cliffs. In fact, I would say more bison have been killed not on cliffs than probably on cliffs, just because that ideal cliff situation is not super common. There's really only a few really good buffalo jumps per se, and then you've got to have a situation in which you can actually herd and start pushing them off. Then we'll move on kind of then from that to stuff like hunting with dogs. You see that. We've talked about that, especially in the book. There's the chapter about that saying, well, how that could have gotten its start was, especially in North America, think about sitting up watching sitting up on a cliff or a high hill and you're overlooking animals, and now you're watching wolves surround and chase down bison. Well, one of the best things is they're going to corner one off and they're going to harass it, and they basically keep biting it and tearing it up and biting its heels, and they're just beating the thing up, and they'll run it a while and it'll stand its ground and it might run it out into the water, but they're relentless with it. And so I proposed, and this obviously makes sense because why wouldn't it? It's like you're standing up and you're watching this happen, you're like, well, let's let the wolves go do most of the work, and then when this thing's really tired, we're going to go in, because we've got a bunch of our buddies, we're going to go in and we're going to either kill the wolves, run them off, and then finish off the bison, or we're going to wait until they've got the bison down and dead or whatever, then we're going to come in and we're going to kill the wolves or run them off. You see that even with people in Africa, where there's literally videos out there of Africans running lions off of kills. So you know that has happened. But then also, if you're hunting with these dogs, or hunting or watching wolves do it, then you might say, well, now all of a sudden we found a wolf den, and we're going to take some of these pups, and then you raise them and then realize that you can kind of get them. They still have their natural instinct to hunt, but they're not. Now you don't have to go kill the wolf anymore. The wolf hunts with you, and you let it eat as well, because obviously certainly the first ones are going to be extremely food aggressive, but you're able to have a working relationship with the wolf, which then translates into becoming dogs later on. So many generations down the line now, they say all dogs we have today, came from the wolf at some point, a common ancestor, obviously, a very, very long time ago, or different species of wolves, whatever. A different story for a different day. But using those dogs is going to be a big help for many, many different scenarios, but it's not an end-all, be-all. Hunting deer with dogs like they do in the South is also something that a lot of people do, and they chase deer around, much like we were driving before. So that is plausible. Yet, if you go hang out with a lot of these guys, they're hunting with shotguns and they're still having a really hard time killing them. So maybe that's not the best way to hunt a specific animal. Obviously, we talked about this. If there was one of these methods that was just significantly better, like if dogs were always better, well, then everybody would just hunt with dogs. You would also notice, like the Hadza in Africa, they use a pack of dogs as well in some of their hunts. They also stalk and walk, but they don't necessarily do that with all the animals. There's some animals that they will try to ambush. If they've got maybe a kudu or something in the area, they're going to try to set up an ambush hunt or spot and stalk that. They're not just going to release the dogs on it, because the animal's just going to outrun them. And that'll segue really well into the persistent hunting, where you see, remember, a lot of times stuff you see on TV too, or for documentaries, it's really over dramatized. Sometimes there's a show that's being put on per se. I'm not saying that it doesn't work like this, but when you really think about it from the practical standpoint, I'm not saying that this hasn't happened or even maybe still happens today, like with the Sawn Bush people. But the idea of seeing an animal and saying, okay, I see one and I'm just going to run at it. And I'm going to keep running. And I'm going to run 60 miles until this thing is exhausted. And then I'm going to kill it. Huge expenditure of calories, for one. Two, I get the concept. The forelegs, they're not sweating. They overheat too much. Humans can carry water. They're running on two legs that they can run long. They can't run as fast, but they can run a longer distance. I got all that whole concept. I got it. Huge expenditure of calories. Exhausting. Takes a very specific running type of person to do that. But also think about it like this. If you're chasing this animal, you are getting further away from where you live and the people that you're trying to feed. If it's just maybe your small group and you're nomadic and it doesn't matter, then maybe you all are doing that and just living. Maybe I get that. There's just so many more practical ways to hunt. Also remember, a lot of them are using different variations of poison. So they're not just seeing an animal that's fresh and green and chasing it, and maybe putting an arrow in one, but especially with something like hitting it with arrow that's got some poison on it. And poison doesn't mean the arrow hits them and then they run 10 steps and fall down and die. That means it's going to take a while for this poison to work, and it's going to slow them down, and that's one of the reasons that they're able later to chase them down. But here's another issue with this is not only are you, if you're just chasing after this animal, you're running it really far away. So now you have to be able to deal with this animal, and you can't imagine how hard now it would be to chase an animal for 30 miles and then have to process the animal and then bring it back, especially in really harsh conditions where that could spoil. So it's like there's going to be a lot of different issues with that, and I know that somebody's going to be like, well, yes, but they did this and they knew how, and I was like, you can make as many points as you want on it. I'm not saying that it isn't done. It's just not super practical. And a lot of people I've heard this too, which is so funny to me because it doesn't make sense, but it's along the same lines where they'll be watching my spot and stock videos. We've got a deer out there or hogs out there or whatever, and I'm working through and I'm being patient. It's like obviously the animal can see me if I move, so I'm just being patient and I'm waiting. And people are screaming in my comments going, you're doing it wrong. You're wasting time. You just run at him. You just run at him. It's like, because I watched in the movies, it'd be like, think about, look at what Hollywood's done, right? You got like, okay, there's some animals out here, right? And then you got a whole group of people that are just crawling on the ground, and they're all looking at each other, hand signals, and these animals are just, I'm over here eating grass, and they're all crawling through, and they get really close, and then the one guy either blows like a little whistle or yells something, and then everybody stands up and goes, ah! And they start running and spearing a whole bunch of stuff, and it's like, that is absolutely ridiculous. It just doesn't work like that. But that's what people seem to think, that this is how the hunting works, is, okay, as soon as you see the animal, you just run at it screaming, and you're going to kill it. You just run at it screaming and kill it. And that's what they think, that's how this works. Now, is there situations in which we have used yelling and stuff like that? Yeah. If you watch the one bison film that we do where a bison was hit back and we really had no choice but to chase and pincushion it.
Got it.
Come on, Joe. Tell me you got that one. I don't know, right behind his ear. Get him, Joe. Spirit thing. Spirit thing. Try not to get run over. Get up there, guys. Joe, get it. Come on, Joe. Let's go.
And it was not the most ideal hunt. We ended up having to try to keep the bison out. I was like, you got to keep them out of this thick area. If they get in here, we're going to lose them.
Get around him.
And you have other guys that are jumping up, yelling, you're scaring them to get them away. I was like, you got to get them out in the open where we can work with them. You can't let them get in this thick stuff because we can literally lose them. So it's interesting way. So yes, you can do stuff like yelling at them and all that, but the whole concept of sneak close and then just get up screaming and running at the animal in spirit, that doesn't work. But that seems to be sometimes the idea that we have, that okay, well, we're just going to get in and we're just going to, like with the persistence hunting, that you're going to sneak in and you're just going to run at them and you're just going to run them down and kill them. It's like these animals can run so much faster than you. Now, let's imagine that you're hunting, an antelope or a deer or something, and you start chasing it. That thing is gone. It can go up and over the next mountain, so you have to have some long flat ground, some big flat ground, open, desert, prairie, whatever. But then it's still going to go so far away. And yes, you can continue to run that direction until you see it and then bump it again. And that's the concept. But here's the thing. If you get off that deer and all of a sudden you see another one, maybe these two does look a lot alike. So I could see how it works maybe if you're chasing like a bull or a buck or something that's very specific and it's got heavier antlers and it's harder to run, or it's an older animal or something, maybe there's your plausibility. But if you see a doe and you're just going to go running after it, and then all of a sudden you come running up on this brush pile and you bust out 3 does, well, which one is it? Because now if you start chasing this one and it's fresh, you just started over, but you're exhausted. And it's like, realistically, this is just, it's such an inefficient way of hunting. So, I mean, take with it what you want, but I've never seen anybody in America actually do real persistence hunting. And the African stuff, I think it's very specialized with the poison, with a specific animal, and I think that there's some dramatization to it and things that maybe we don't exactly know behind the scenes. I've not been there, so I don't specifically know. Just from my experience, that's what I've typically gathered from persistence style of hunting. Much more efficient ways overall. So of course we did discuss about the poison arrows and stuff too, where poisons were not used everywhere. We really have no proof of them being used in North America at all. Typically you find poison stuff, there's a big correlation to me between places that don't have good napping stone that end up using stuff more like poison. So they don't have the real penetration and laceration qualities of a good napping stone, but they do have stuff like bamboo or bone or antler, stuff like that to make certain projectiles out of, and then they can implement some sort of a poison on top of that. So I wrote some stuff about that in the book as well. No need to go in huge detail over that. It's kind of self-explanatory. And I don't have any experience actually hunting with poison, so I can't really offer a lot of insight. And then just briefly on the horseback, obviously that's more of a modern thing. So you have, not only do you have the Native Americans using horses from the Spanish that they brought, and that's a much later time in history. But then you also have the European horseback hunting, medieval and even earlier. Obviously that would have been considerably earlier than what was happening in North America. So horseback hunting really would have originated, probably more Middle East, if I had to take a guess. Maybe Southern Europe somewhere. I don't know specifically how old it is, but obviously hunting on the horseback works in some scenarios. Again, some other scenarios not so much. Some animals can be hunted easier on horseback than others. But again, if it was the most efficient way to hunt, then everybody would be doing it. Again, you typically benefit from having more open ground as opposed to if you're hunting in the tight forest. Now it's going to be a lot more difficult. You're not really going to be able to get in the woods and just run a deer down on horseback, because that deer is going to be able to move much smaller in and out, and it's going to go in things that you can't ride a horse through. So again, not a one-size-fits-all. Obviously, we've got here on the Hunt Primitive YouTube channel, I've got 2 different videos hunting hogs on horseback with bows and arrows and with spears that my buddy Vastin. I'm not a horseman anywhere like he is, and he rides bareback, throws spears and shoots arrows, and runs down hogs when they get out in the pasture. Different times of year they get out in the pastures, and they'll be out there real far, and you really can't hunt them any other way. But you can get on a horseback, and that horse goes a lot faster. It's a big horse too, and it way outruns those hogs, and so then he can run them down, kind of corral around them, and either spear them or shoot them. So again, different scenarios, but that doesn't work all year long either. When they're not out in that pasture, or they're not in short palmettos, when they're in the thick brush, we can't really do that. So again, different times of the year, different areas, different techniques. So nothing's a one size fits all, but I think that kind of covers everything that we really wanted to talk about. I'm sure there are some methods that I didn't specifically discuss, but that's okay. I think it was just more or less a fun conversation of talking about all the different methods and what I've typically found to be really efficient and what's not been efficient. But what's not been efficient for me may in fact be efficient for somebody else. So I'm not going to say that I know everything about the subject. I'm just giving you some insight off my experiences based on the 60 some big game animals that I've killed at this point in time, and my numbers. I guess this is a fun last point to mention. The amount of animals that I would kill ambush hunting, whether I was hunting in a tree stand, which is obviously modern, but I was making wood ladder stands, whether hunting in a tree stand or in an ambush situation, I have killed more animals now, like I kill more a year by walking and stalking than I do ambush hunting. So that is my experience with it, that if I just get out and say I'm going to walk and hunt, now obviously I'm hunting areas that have hogs that are significantly easier, but it's not super uncommon for me to shoot 2 deer a year. Not, really we stop at about there. We'll shoot a lot of hogs because there's plenty of those. Deer, not so much. Usually just shoot 1 or 2 deer a year, and that's sufficient, unless we get a time that maybe deer populations are really high, like they were in Montana when I was younger. But so to go out and kill 2 deer a year walking and stalking isn't terribly unrealistic. but, you know, I've had many of opportunities that I've let go. But typically speaking, I would say I have killed more animals now per year walking and stalking than I have actually ambush hunting. But not everybody has that opportunity either. Sometimes, you know, if you're hunting public land in deer season, you're not going to be able to just go walk because you're just going to be running into people all the time. So I understand it's not a one size shoe fits everybody sort of situation. I'm just letting you know that, again, is the most efficient way that I have personally found to primitive hunt. So anyway, hope it was at least somewhat of a fun conversation and some food for thought. And I said, I don't know that we learned necessarily a whole lot, but hopefully you took something from it and did get some value. And wish you a lot of luck in your own primitive building and hunting adventures. And we'll catch you on another episode of the Secrets and Science Chapters.